One. So welcome. All right. So within this, the main social worker ethics considerations, we always want to make sure that the primary responsibility of what we're doing is for the welfare of our clients and colleagues. So a key thing that we have to remember is that we have to keep in mind the larger legal as well as aspects of the person's life. So if there's some like legal things going on and they're breaking laws or trying to kill someone or hurt someone, then we need to make sure that we report that. So other than that, we remain confidentiality with our clients. So child abuse, neglect, self-to-harm, self-to others are major things that if a client comes into our session or if you see on the exam like, hey, this person says they have intent means to hurt somebody, that's a safeties option. We need to report that to the appropriate parties. And this is for people that are child, so 0 to 18, and adults, which is quantified 65 and older. Anyone from 18 to 65 is considered domestic violence, and the way that we address that is totally different than we would child abuse and or adult abuse. So when you get into the questions, always remember what is the age of the person, what's going on, and what is the motivation of the client. So if it's domestic violence and the person doesn't want to touch on that, you have to let it go. You have to just let the client be, which then leads us into self-determination, which self-determination is often thrown around on the exam to trick people. We always want to give people self-determination, meaning allowing them to guide and dictate what happens into their practice, but sometimes we have to limit it because some of their actions may be posing more danger to them or others. So let's say a client wants to go against medical advice and leave the hospital without all this. So the way we would do that is say, well, you're involuntary getting hospitalized because you are trying to hurt someone and or hurt yourself. Or at the end of the day, if it's not that deep and they're just leaving against medical advice, then we would still want to review and provide them with the resources and information that could be helpful for them. But at the end of the day, we just need to document. So that way, once you get your beautiful license, you don't end up losing. So if you see self-determination on the exam, don't be like jump, skin, and gun ho to select that as the answer because it might not even be the best answer. But it's a buzzword, and when people hear it, they love it, and they want to make sure that it's quantifiable, but not always the greatest thing. Which then leads us into the person needing to have consent. So the social worker should always make sure it's understandable to the person and that there's no language barrier or comprehension barrier. So let's say I have a client that's primary language is Spanish. I can't just do it in English, provide the consents in English and call it good. And to be like, all right, you understand, sign this, or you're not getting services type deal. Because then that is us asserting privilege over somebody that otherwise might not understand and may feel more vulnerable. So when we have that, we need to limit it and make sure that person's being heard and quantified. So making sure that even the third payers, so like insurance companies, making sure that the client knows like, hey, you sign this paper, I'm going to have to let the insurance company know what's going on with your services. Not everything, but just for the basis of need to know. So a lot of times we will see questions say like, this lawyer comes in, gives you a subpoena, what do you do? Most people are like, well, we would just let the client determine that. Well, we need to assert privilege beforehand. But even if the client wants you to share information, you need to make sure you have written consent on file because verbal is not defendable and not able to track. You could be like, well, you told me this on this day. And then they're like, I never did that. And then you'd be at fault for that. So again, comprehension is the biggest thing. And when in doubt, just get more clarification and make sure that the person's needs are being met as well as you're making sure they're being heard. So you may encounter people that are illiterate or don't have the primary language. So you need to make sure that the person comprehends and or get them interpreters or somebody that should make it possible. So we need to make sure that the person's comprehension is established. So let's say you don't understand what someone is saying, you would ask them, so what did you mean by that? Same thing with our clients, same thing in case scenarios. We want to make sure that the person comprehends, understands, and is able to be in right mind, sound body, and reason, and have an understanding of what they're actually going to be doing. So with that, you need to make sure that when people lack capacity to make the consent, that you protect them and make sure that the third party is not trying to exploit them or do things that the other person wouldn't want to. So making sure that the client's consistent with the level of understanding and what they would actually want. So let's say we have a situation, somebody wants to hospitalize a client, and that client is like, I don't want to be hospitalized. I totally don't need to be hospitalized. But this person is their guardian or anything. We just want to make sure that the client's needs are being heard, and is there actual evidence for this to actually happen? And we need to make sure they're doing what is consistent with the client's wishes and what their interests would actually be. So a lot of times you'll see people that might go against what the client's interest may be, and we would just stand up and make sure they're able to consent and make sure it is something that they would actually be in agreement with, rather than just proceeding to be like, yeah, this is the situation. Good luck, type deal. And with that, we also want to make sure that clients receive an involuntary or transparent and give the person the right to refuse, or if they aren't in the right mindset, sound body, or reason, they kind of lose that, because if they're trying to hurt someone else, hurt themselves, or abusing and neglecting people, they kind of lost their right to be able to make that decision for themselves. And within this, the social worker needs to make sure that if any technology is used, that the person is understanding why the technology is being used. So cell phones are starting to become a huge thing. And if you want to use cell phones or recording devices or anything like that, you need to make sure the client understands why you're using them and get written consent for that, because you don't want to be caught with client recordings or anything like that and then get in trouble for it. So you always want to make sure that you have written and informed consent right from the initial screening or interview. So that way there's no question of whether you have it or not. And that way you cover your tail and make sure things are ethical and being able to happen. And then the social worker should make sure the client's intellectual, emotional, and physical ability to use technology is understood, and that the benefits outweigh the negatives of possibly using it. Like, is it entirely necessary? Is there just something that you would like to do because it's convenient for you? And it's actually more detrimental. The client gets more anxious when you're recording them, or gets more anxious when the technological devices around them. So you just want to make sure that the client is okay with it, and that way you're not just making something that's convenient for you. Which the next bullet is basically saying, like, any audio recordings must be permitted by the person, and then the social worker should receive consent before conducting anything. So when in doubt, make sure it's undocumented. So whenever there's documentation or anything along those lines, we need to make sure that foreseeable imminent harm or compelling professional reasons aren't present, and we're not just pushing past them because it's something that we actually want to do. So if you get anything out of this first little bit of bullets, it's if there's any potential for harm to help others and potentially someone not getting their voice heard, make sure that you stand up for that. That's just the basis of what social work is. Beyond that, and then the competence is more or less around our competence. So the social worker needs to stay within what they're actually competent in doing. So for example, if I did not pass this exam, the clinical exam is the one that in Michigan that I had to take. So I didn't do the master's, I did the clinical, but transferable and the exams aren't that different, but it's kind of irrelevant. If I wasn't able to and know the code of ethics and be able to provide supervision and stuff like that and help people pass the exam, shout out to people that are taking it soon and good luck to that. But so far this year, we've had close to 70 people already pass. But if I didn't have that backing and I didn't have that knowledge behind me, I would be incompetent and I would actually be unethically providing this. So you need to make sure that when you are performing things, you need to make sure you have the right license, education, trainings, etc. beyond you, or you have a supervisor that's willing to sign off and make sure that they're covering you. So if anything ever comes up and you're like, wow, I don't know if this person actually has the training or necessary needed, make sure that's covered in backing. If there's anything in practice questions or questions on the actual exam, Let's say the social worker does not have any knowledge, it's always refer out. Always. Regardless of how they feel, regardless of what they think. If you do not have something, you can't just build it from the ground up. But if you have a little bit of experience in the foundation built, you can seek supervision to fill in those unnecessary things or those necessary skills that you have. So that is a key thing with competence. And you also need to make sure you make appropriate study and consultation to make yourself competent within an area. You can't just neglect it and say, that's not something I enjoy doing. But a lot of clients around me or a lot of things in my practice require me to do it. I just am stubborn and don't want to. It's your ethical duty, and you could actually be unethical for not being able to push through and wanting to do that for yourself as well as your clients. When the standards don't exist and it's a new emerging thing, you need to make sure that you're not doing any harm to them, and you need to make sure that you're competent before delivering something. So let's say when cognitive behavioral therapy was a new intervention, you had to make sure that you were consulting with people that actually spearheaded it and were competent. So that way you weren't just spitballing and saying, okay, we're talking about this person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, so I think you're being competent. No, you had to sit down and actually make sure you weren't hurting your clients indirectly and you were actually protecting their rights. So the social worker, again, if you're going to use technology, you need to make sure you're aware of it and you're competent with using that. So let's say rather than doing paper assessments, you start doing computer assessments. You need to be willing to navigate in this. You need to make sure that if there's any communication barriers or anything like that, the right accommodations are met. Meaning, let's say we have a client that doesn't understand what you're saying. They need to be aware of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and where it's going to take them. So whenever you're reading questions, you need to make sure, am I just jumping the gun and the client doesn't really know what's going on? So that's why the acronym, the usage of the educate is important, because most times people will say, okay, this person comes in, they're depressed, they want to improve their mood, they've been drinking alcohol, what should I do? And it's like, well, the client wants to improve their mood, so I'm just going to jump right on it and improve their mood. Not so fast. You need to inform them why you would supersede that, and then want to actually make sure that you assess their alcohol use. Make sure and say, hey, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm assessing this. This is why I'm moving forward with that. So you always want to make sure any move you make is a move that the person is understanding and willing and able to comprehend it. And you always want to, always want to make sure that you know the laws that are governing technology, your practice, and your reporting. So based on your state, go to your state licensing board, say, what is it for us to report abuse? What is it for us to report neglect? What is it for us to use technology? Are we able to use technology? Are we not? What's the transporting laws? What is social media laws, etc.? So that way you know what you're doing, so that way you're not making an indirect, unethical move, because it's hard for you to defend it and say that, well, I didn't know, because that's negligence, because the opportunity information is out there and available to your palms. Then another key thing that gets a lot of people off board is when they say, well, there's an ethical or diversity consideration in this question. This is super important. I need to jump to it. I need to respect that client's culture. I was just talking to somebody earlier, and we were doing like practice questions, and one of them cited where the person's culture, and they're like, well, I need to respect that. And I was like, is there any safety concerns within this? And they're like, okay, hang on, let me reread that. And then I blacked out where the cultural consideration was, and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I overlooked that. I would never have done that. And I said, well, that's something that you need to recognize, is you're omitting information and jumping to conclusions based on certain parts of the question. So whenever you're studying for this, make sure you read it line by line, make sure you understand, and it is actually adding or taking away from it. But as a social worker, we need to be at least somewhat aware of what different cultures are and what strengths exist within that and how influential it is for a client. So whenever working with clients, I always ask them, so like what importance does your cultural or ethnic background play in your life? And they're like, well, it doesn't entirely, or it does a lot. So you need to make sure you start where the client is and know what is adding to the situation, what is not. And it's up to you to have the knowledge of particular different cultures of the person. That's not to say that you need to have a book of pedagogical things based on every culture. Like, here's the history of people that are from Africa. Here's the history of the people from Venezuela. This is the history of the people from Mexico, etc. Like, you don't need to know all of these different cultures, but at least have some type of backing of the norms and regulations within that. And when in doubt, just ask the client and be like, I no disrespect or anything. I just want to make sure I'm best serving you. And what are the things that I should know to help you? And it can open a conversation and help you establish rapport. And then within that, you need to make sure that you have the education to go beyond that. So if you don't know something about it, educate yourself about diversity, oppression, different racial and ethnic backgrounds. What would national origin, or like race, sex, sexual orientation, gender, age, etc. do within this? So these aren't all things that you have to be like, well, this person aligns with this political party, so this is the way that I need to address them. But just being aware of it and knowing I don't know everything, so I need to make sure that I am doing what is best for the person. And then again, they'll always interweave this electronic importance within this, because there's a huge push up on the use of electronics and like making sure people are consensual. Make sure it's actually culturally appropriate and they're aware of why you're doing it. Again, you always want to make sure that you aren't indirectly harming them or triggering them, etc. Which then rolls us into our conflicts of interest. So it basically just says like, be aware and avoid them at all costs if possible, meaning it's up to the social worker to use their best professional judgment to determine that. So they should always inform the client of the potential and take the reasonable steps to do that. So you want to make sure there's the greatest possibility or least likelihood of actually harming the client. So if there's real or potential, take the responsible actions to resolve the matter. Meaning, let's say I have a client that works in a mechanic shop. My car breaks down, knock on some wood, and I go in there, I see them. It'd be best for me to go to a different garage. Yes, it'd be inconvenient for me, but I need to protect them because I need to protect them to the greatest extent. Meaning, yes, it might not be a big deal, but let's say my brakes go out, they work on the brakes, and then they end up being more damaged. So when it's impossible to protect a person's interest or identity, it may require that you terminate the person. And some people may be like, well, that's rather harsh. But there's other therapists, there's other skilled professionals out there that could be able to help them. They're not basically saying, get the heck out of here and you're never getting services again. You're just saying, hey, I know my limitations and I don't want this to potentially go south. And I want to make sure that you get your needs met and everything is good on the up and up. So the social worker should not take unfair advantage of them. So you shouldn't be like, oh yeah, you're a mechanic. You could totally do this job for half the price of what your job is telling me. So how about you do that? Or, hey, I know that you know this person that knows a lot about business and I'm trying to open a business. How about we work together? I can pro bono you some sessions, scratch your back, you scratch mine, bad moves. And always in instances when dual relationships are avoidable, it's always, 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 always the social worker's responsibility to bear the burden, meaning we have to keep into considerations what is the possibility of this and how we're going to navigate this in a professional and business manner, meaning we need to do what is appropriate. And again, make sure it's culturally sensitive, meaning in some cultures it's disrespectful to not actually engage in them or not accept gifts or anything like that, because if it's more detrimental, we need to use our professional and an ethical mindset. So always keep that in mind. Like whenever if you're doing something, make sure you're able to like justify and actually have concrete evidence. And within this, we always need to anticipate potentially having conflictual roles and being aware of it and calling it out and saying, I see this happening. What do you think about it? Or this is why I'm going to do this, because it's up to me to make sure that your needs are being met and I'm not interweaving or overlapping. So for example, if you're a school social worker, you may interact with a lot of parents, and let's say CPS gets involved and the parent comes to you and says, why'd you do X, Y, or Z? You're kind of in like a dual relationship or conflict of interest, because they may walk up to you and say, well, you've seen me for X amount of time. You know, I'm a good parent. You know, all of these things. You may not even be a part of the CPS case. So put you into a weird situation. So you should always clarify your roles and make sure that you mitigate or minimize any potential conflicts of interest, such as, I noticed that I know this child, I know the parent. How about I just refer you to a different professional? It's not that I don't want to help you guys, and it's not that don't have the expertise and things to help you. I just feel like it could be a sticky situation, and I want to make sure that you're aware of it. And we should avoid any communication on the internet, such as email, social media, anything like that, unless it is for work related, such as, let's say, client communicates via text message and you do call reminds them via text message and they don't have any other way for you to get a hold of them, then it's okay. But make sure it is not for personal or non-work related things. You can't just hit up your client and say, hey, homie, what's up? Let's hang out. I know that you are trying to look for silver tasks. How about we look for them together off of work time? Bad moves. Always cover yourself, and there are other ways for you to empower and do it. And be aware that posting personal information can create conflict of interest. So oftentimes social workers will like change their name or use their last name or middle name and to hide themselves. Me personally, I just have my first and last name. Those that have seen me on Facebook, I don't really hide, because it's like I don't really have anything that I wouldn't know about me otherwise. I like Michigan football, I like motivational speaking, and I like helping people. Welcome. It's not like you're going to find anything other out of the ordinary. But make sure that you don't accept any friend requests, because that is a sticky situation for you and the client. Puts them in a weird situation. So if you do something, make sure it's something that you'd want everyone to see, because you're going to have inevitably have clients reach out to you on Facebook, friend request you, and be like, oh my gosh, why didn't you accept it? So I had a couple of clients actually say, man, I friend request you, why didn't you accept it? And I just was like, it's not appropriate, it's not ethically sound, it's not that I don't want to get to know you better, but how about we do that in session? And it's a kind of a conversational piece and allows for you to build stronger relationships. So we should be aware that any use of technology should be appropriate based on the person's descriptive specifiers, meaning like race, ethnicity, language, sexual orientation, or any other affiliations, and make sure that it's particularly appropriate for the client. Make sure they're aware, get their consent, and then inform them. And again, we should avoid accepting any requests on any social media platforms or any internet-based things to prevent any boundary confusion or any appropriate dual relationships. Again, bad moves. It's not that we can't stay connected to clients. It's just that we cannot have relationships with them. Client hits you up, says, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is the progress that I've made. It's okay to keep up with them that way, but you do not want to have them on social media to just constantly get a hold of and then be able to get a hold of you. So then walking into confidentiality, when you don't have consent, keep it. So the social worker should not solicit personal information except for compelling reasons professionally. Meaning, you can't just walk up to your client and say, like, oh, LeBron James, like, that's totally cool. That's the Lakers game. Can you give me tickets? Stuff like that. No. Keep it professional, and anything that you find out about the client should be guiding their process rather than you actually just get into all of them on some weird vibes. So let's say you're working with a client, or the case scenario says, like, social worker starts asking the client about sexual things, and the client's work is about anxiety, not around sexual things. Unethical there. Just because you're curious doesn't mean that you should ask the question. And the social worker may disclose confidential when you have valid consent, meaning, let's say you have a consent because the client is on probation, probation officer is wondering what's going on in services, you have a written consent from the person, and it is okay. But without it, do not disclose any information. Assert privilege and do your thing because you've worked way too hard for the license to be there. So we should protect confidentiality obtained in anything throughout the work and make sure that general expectation is to keep it and it does not apply to prevent serious harm to self, others, or any homicidal or suicidal. So when doing that, we want to make sure that we disclose only the least amount of information, and any of the information revealed is stuff that was necessary for us to prevent that. So let's say I have a client that walks in, says they want to kill their wife, and they leave out of the agency. I can contact the wife and say, hey, this is what's going on. This is what they said. This is what we've been working on, and be aware of it. So I wouldn't just call her and be like, hey, this is totally what we're working on. Can you reinforce what your husband's working on? It'd be really nice without written consent. So we should always inform clients about disclosing the information and the potential harms to them if the information was to be disclosed. So let's say I get a subpoena from a lawyer and I ask the client, what would you like me to do? And they're like, yeah, I want you to release any information. I love my wife. I don't want anything to be hidden from you. And you're like, well, here's all of the bad things that you've said, and this is what the potential dangers of it would be. Again, educating them so that way they can make an informed decision. However, we can't prevent them from making any decisions based on what they would like to do. And the social worker should always know that there's limitations of confidentiality, and that when that is possible, we need to make sure that the client is aware that we can't always maintain confidentiality, and if you want to harm someone else, harm others, abuse and neglect, that we would have to disclose that information. And then when providing services to families or couples, we need to make sure that people are aware that if you say something within this, it's pretty essential that everyone else involved in the treatment center would also know about it. Meaning, like, if it's necessary for us to deliver our jobs to effectively address you individually as well as your family, we would also promote them to have them honor the confidentialities within their session, so that way something that's found out during session isn't just exploitatively utilized in their personal life. And then again, if you're doing anything, make sure that they're aware. Should not disclose any confidential unless you have authorized. So again, kind of already covered that. And then the social worker should protect confidentiality when responding to a request from the media. Someone contacts you about your client and asks you like what you've been working on, just don't do it. Just don't breach any of the confidentialities within this, and protect and make sure you have the written records around sensitive information. And then we need to, again, make reasonable to make sure that it's in a secure place, not available to everyone else. And then make sure that when using text messages or anything like that, you bear the burden of what you share about the client. So again, as there's the increase of utilization is done, the social worker needs to be the one that bears the burden of what we use and utilize the information. And in the event of unauthorized use, the social worker should inform the clients of the disclosure, like, hey, this amount of information was used about you and it wasn't supposed to. It's our bad. We're filing claims against ourselves and we need to protect you. So I just wanted to let you know that this is something that happened and it's our bad. And then we should avoid searching or gathering client information unless it's compelled. So let's say you have a client that comes in and says, you have a wild legal history, but they're there for anxiety. You shouldn't go on like the criminal website and say like, oh, okay, what has this person actually been doing in their life to help promote it? Because they're not anxious because they have a criminal history. But if they bring up their criminal history and say, this is why I'm anxious, look it up, then it's compelling professional reason. And then again, on any social media or anything, don't vent about your day. Given we have wild days and wild clients, don't go on social media and say, well, this person, X, Y, and Z situation did X, Y, and Z, made me so angry. So for example, let's have a client named Medicine. Medicine didn't go to a detox facility, fought somebody in group, made me so angry, and I wish that they would just do and reach their goals. And then I posted it on social media, and people are like, oh, wow, are you talking about this person? I could be liable because I'm disclosing confidential information. So again, social media is like a double-edged sword. People love to vent on it, but it's also not good to be venting about work and clients. So make sure that you're always aware on the up and up about the laws and regulations governing your state, and make sure it's just good practice to be in constant contact with your licensing board of saying, what do I need to know? What are good things? And then we need to make sure that precautions are taken for the client in case they die or just in general. So if records are being disclosed or released, make sure that it's being done. And then when doing it for teaching purposes, like I do lectures at the university, I always change the person's name, but I always ask them if I can use their situation to educate. And then I get a written consent that says, Medicine gave me permission to use their X, Y, and Z information during this class for this time, and then I will not use it until I get their consent again. So even if we change like name and details and stuff, it can be kind of dangerous because someone might know that person and be like, oh, wow, are you talking about this person? I've heard their story too. And then when discussing in consultation, the client information should be shared unless there's a reason for the person knowing that information. You can't just go into your coworker's office, vent about a client if they're not involved in the treatment team as well. And then leading us into the access of records, clients have reasonable access to the records unless it could be more detrimental or harmful to them. So let's say we have a client that is psychotic, has some schizophrenia type symptoms, and it would be more detrimental for them to know the information. It can actually perpetuate and make their symptoms worse. You just want to document their request and why you rejected it and have a clinical backing within that. And there are times where social workers have been overzealous and said like this person shouldn't have access to the records, and they actually should have. So make sure when you're doing something that is justified and you seek supervision if you have any questions regarding that. And then always you'd want to inform the clients of the ethical standards and the use of technology if you use that. Again, make sure you have the informed consent from the person. And you always want to protect confidentiality. Like regardless if the person's in the same group as that person, you wouldn't just open their file and be like, hey, this is what this person's doing. Could you help them out? I know that you're doing the same recovery path or go to the same meetings to them. So, and which then leads us in, and under no circumstance should you ever engage in sexual behavior. And I always kind of chuckle around this, but this is like the lead-in reason why people, one, lose their license, and two, are under like scrutiny or disciplinary action. They just try to sleep and have sex with their clients. They get too close to the client. And that's why people lose their license and get it stripped. So I find it kind of like chuckling because some people are like, oh, that would never be a consideration for me. I could never do that. That's just bad behavior. But it happens. So just being aware of it. And if you do see it, say something about it. And social workers should not engage in any sexual activities or contact or try to exploit the person. Like I said, should go without saying much, but it happens. And the social worker, not their clients or their relatives, bear the burden. So If something does happen, all on the social worker, because clients are in a vulnerable spot. And if a social worker is willing to exploit that, they got into the field for the absolute wrong reason. So bad moves, bad vibes, and again, social workers should not engage, have any sexual, because there's harm to the client. And even if it is a former client, you shouldn't do it because you bear the full burden of that. Because even if they're a previous client, doesn't mean that it's okay, because it is not a good move. So, and then the social worker should maintain appropriate boundaries, always be forthcoming of like, hey, this is what the relationship is about. This is what it is. I may disclose things about myself if it is appropriate. So self-disclosure is not a thing that everyone should be doing. If it could be done tactfully and actually benefit and perpetuate the client's progress, go for it. But I would say err on the side of caution, because it is actually a skill to be able to do that. I even question it sometimes whether I should or not, but it's always, always, always when in question, don't do it and seek supervision. The social worker should not engage in any physical activity or contact with the person, meaning hugs could be a little more intimate because it would be triggering, and then setting clear boundaries. However, if you work with kids, it's kind of hard to set that boundary with them, but make sure that you are very transparent about what it means. And however, there are certain cultural considerations where it is appropriate to hug. So again, use your best clinical and professional judgment around that. And again, social worker should not sexually harass or try to get with their clients. We're there to help them, but not help them in that manner. And social workers should not use derogatory language in anything unless the client is doing it. You can quote clients, but don't just be dropping F words and calling clients like assholes and stuff. It's not a good move, not a good look, and it just makes you unprofessional within that. So make sure if the use of it is, it's based on what the client has said and you're quotating this. Make sure everyone with responsible things. And then when we're accepting payment, make sure that they're fair, reasonable, and they're actually what people can pay. Don't be charging people like 100 an hour if you're like in an impoverished area, or even in general. Like, make sure what you're doing is ethical and people are willing to engage and do it. And again, the social worker should avoid any goods or services for payments. However, if there's any bartering arrangements, you need to make sure that it is under very limited circumstances. So, and it is up to the social worker to bear that burden. And it needs to be culturally appropriate and community appropriate, and make sure that they're consensual. You're not just like, hey, I know you own a farm. How about you just give me beef? And again, they assume the full burden of the arrangement, not the client. And if the client comes even more deeper into it, it's up to that person to do that. So you may have a question that says like, clients accepting eggs for services, is this appropriate? And if it's what the community norm is and what the person's willing and able to do, and we cannot solicit a private fee if the person is entitled to services under insurance. So let's say client has Medicaid and you're trying to have them privately cash you out and they don't know that they could get it under Medicaid. Yes, we work in a field that the compensation isn't always the best, but the best type of money is ethically made money, because it'll end up being maintainable and manageable in the long run. So don't exploit clients or people based on what we see here. And then if someone lacks decision making, the social worker should make sure that they have informed consent or protect the client's rights based on what they think is appropriate or what is in the best interest of the client. This doesn't mean that we just are like power of attorney type deal, but if we think it's going to be more detrimental or harmful to the client, it's okay for us to insert and take over and do that. And if there's any interruptions of it, we need to make sure that the person keeps maintaining services based on their ability to pay. So if there's self-harm to others, anything like that, you'd still see them. But if not, you'd be able to do that. And when referring, we need to make sure that the person specializes or has the knowledge beyond what we actually can do. So if, let's say we have a client that has an eating disorder, Phil doesn't have experience with treating people that have eating disorders, it's okay for me to refer them to somebody else, but I need to make sure that person is more educated and actually specializes in that, rather than me just getting them on someone else's caseload so that they can do the work. So, and the social worker, when they refer, they should always educate and make sure that the steps are followed. So let's say I'm coordinating someone, I need to make sure I have the client's consent, but I can actually ask them and say, hey, this is something that's super duper important for this client. This is the times that the person needs. This is the client's presenting issues, and this is why I feel like the referral is appropriate. But it's ultimately up to the clients whether they take the referrals or not. So we can't really just shove it down the client's throat and say, you're doing this or you're not getting services. And within that, social worker should not be getting fee for service based on referrals. Your friend cannot just cash you out money or give you gift cards or give you incentives for you referring them clients. It's not how it works, because then it's just a business for you and not actually making sure the client's needs are adequately met and addressed. And then the social worker should terminate people based on their completion. Just because you like talking to people and keeping up with their life and making sure that they're doing well, if there's no clinical need, it's best for you to discharge them, because you continuing to see them as unethical practice, and you to make sure that the client's needs and interests are being addressed, rather than you just continuing to see the person based on you liking it. And then reasonable steps should be taken to avoid abandoning a client that is still in need of services. Like I said, ability to pay is not something that you would actually want to end services around. And if the social worker feels that they need to withdraw services, make sure that you minimize the possible effects. Let's say you're leaving the job, make sure you give a considerable amount of time, up to like maybe a month, 5 weeks, to transition them, so that way they know where they're going, what's it going to look like, and that way you're actually able to do it. And again, the social worker should bear the burden and make sure that the client's needs are actually still being met, and that they help make adequate steps to help that continue. And then social workers and fee-for-service may terminate clients who are not paying if the financial contracts have been made clear to the client, and if the client does not pose major imminent danger to the person, self, or others. Meaning, let's say we have a client, they're not paying their bill, and we want to get them out of there. It's okay. They're not trying to harm themselves, not trying to harm you, or anything like that. So the social worker should not terminate services to pursue any business transactions or sexual relationships. Again, bad moves. Why? Because we don't do that. That's just not good behavior and ethical behavior at that. And then social worker that anticipate termination should notify the client promptly and seek transfer, referral, or continuation, and make sure that the client is in on this. Let's say, the social worker is available, client doesn't really like the social worker doesn't really have a good rep in the agency or area, the client doesn't want that. Don't stop at that. Look for another social worker and make sure the client's needs and vocalizations are actually heard. And then the social worker who's leaving an employment should inform clients of the appropriate options and continuations of that. It's okay to leave a job. You need to make sure your needs are met, make sure you're growing, make sure you're doing what you would like to. But at the end of the day, it's inappropriate for you not to make sure that people are actually continuing to get their needs met. So then we transition to social workers' ethical responsibilities to colleagues. So should go without saying, but all social workers should treat their colleagues with respect, and make sure that the person has the right qualifications. So if you see somebody that doesn't have the right trainings or credentials to be doing something, ask them, do you think this is a good idea? So they should always avoid any negative chatter or talk about other professionals. Yes, you may not like everybody that you work with, but you need to make sure you're treating them with respect and make sure that your criticism is not based on things that aren't actually true. So providing negative criticism of people is appropriate if it's professional and there's evidence backing it. Don't belittle or bully someone if you just because you don't like them or feel like you need to be superior to them. We should always cooperate with other professionals and make sure the well-being of the clients is always met and adequately assessed and put on the forefront. Let's say I don't like a coworker, they don't like me, but this client needs both of us to work together to make sure that their needs are getting met. That's a no-brainer. You just need to set your egos aside and help that person. And then the social worker should respect the confidentiality shared within the confines of consultation or with just peer-to-peer. The social worker should ensure that the colleagues understand the social worker's obligation to confidentiality. So before I discuss anything with a coworker, I always say, you know, that we need to stick to the least amount of information and that anything I tell you or anything you tell me needs to remain confidential and we can't take it or utilize it otherwise. And always when an interdisciplinary team, the social worker should make sure they contribute to the well-being of the clients and make sure that it is always utilizing the perspectives of the social work profession, meaning client comes first, respect your colleagues, as well as when you feel like something's not right, make sure that you adequately address it. Make sure that your professional ethical obligations are clear and established. We wouldn't be in a collaborative team if people didn't know what their roles and responsibilities were and we had an overall mission that we were all working together. It's not like people are going to be pulling rank and saying like, well, I do this, you do that. It's like, okay, you and I work together and make sure that this gets done. So for example, this study group in general, I'm providing information, you guys are providing feedback, and then people are providing their insight as well. So that way we can give you the highest likelihood that you're able to pass this exam. And the social worker should always keep ethical considerations in an attempt to resolve through the appropriate channels, meaning talk to the colleague first if the colleague isn't aware or willing to hear you out. Then you go to a supervisor and make sure that you pursue the appropriate avenue. So one, always go to the client, or not the client, the colleague, and then if that doesn't work, go to the supervisor to make sure that it does get vocalized, because if you have a feeling that something's not going right, then it needs to be addressed adequately. So social workers should not take advantage of a dispute with a colleague or exploit it, such as saying like, wow, this person's getting wild and they never get along with anyone. So I should get the promotion and not them. No, bad moves. Just because there's a conflict or something doesn't mean that you should just take the opportunity, quote unquote. And you should never try to pin clients against other professionals. Like there was one time I had a dispute with a colleague because we were both running a group. And the one time that I was absent, they said that I was dropping out and that I didn't really care about the clients. So then when I came back, the client said like, oh, I thought you guys thought you were leaving and you guys didn't care about us anymore. And it's a whole thing that we had to talk to a supervisor about. But yes, never let people exploit you, or you never exploit them for professional gain. And social workers should always seek advice or counsel of their colleagues when it's in the best interest of the client. So supervision isn't always the answer, but it's kind of the preferred channel. But if it's not available and you feel like this person also has expertise in the field that could adequately assist and address that, then you can go to them and make sure that you pick their brain about what they think. And you should always keep yourself informed about the colleague's area of interest and expertise and competence. So everyone at my agency knows that I could definitely provide insight on substance use because I've been practicing that my entire career, and co-occurring mental health and substance use. So a lot of people always come to me and say, Phil, I have this client that's addicted to heroin or started using cocaine or crack. What do I do? How do I adequately facilitate discussion on that? Do they need residential? Do they need detox? Anything like that? And I think it's kind of cool, but it is also kind of overwhelming at times. But I always make sure and say what I think is best, but always double check with like agency policy. But I'm also aware that one of my colleagues is super informed in trauma. So if anyone has trauma, always shoot into there. But if so, and I have another person that is huge on racial and ethnic rights and privilege and oppression. So I'll always go to her if there's something like that because that's her wheelhouse. So you need to create a team of animals in their respective fields so that way you know when to consult people. You should only use consultation when that person has the expertise or competence in that area. Don't just go to vent and gather their thoughts and blindly jump into this, and make sure that you only disclose the least amount of information when in consultation as well. You wouldn't just randomly start expounding about everything that happened in this client. So make sure, even in any disclosure that you have, least amount of information, and if it's beyond your agency or assisting the client, that you have their consent. So sexual relationships with colleagues, you should always avoid this. Why? Because you don't want to have any exploitation or potential for exploitation. So you always want to make sure that you always exercise professional behavior. Don't try sleeping with an intern that you have that's working under you or you're training them or anything like that. Work is for work, intimate relationships are outside of work. And then the social worker should avoid engaging in any sexual relationships with colleagues when there's a potential conflict of interest. Meaning, you're a therapist, I'm a therapist, and we work together with clients. Bad move. In a sexual relationship, you should make sure that you avoid the conflict of interest. So when I when I was getting my clinical supervision, my first supervisor walked into my office one day and was like, "Hey, I think I want to stop providing you supervision." And I was like, why?" And then come to find out, she wanted to engage in an intimate relationship and actually sexual relationship with me, when she was just utilizing her power for getting what she wanted, which was a relationship with me. So that ended up being an interesting discussion with our clinic supervisor. But yes, when don't one let people exploit you or to exploit them. And if there's any sexual harassment, you need to make sure that you report it to the appropriate authorities. So one, you tell the colleague like immediately, please don't do that. That's not appropriate behavior. But if they continue, then you would go to a supervisor. And then if someone has direct knowledge that someone is letting their other things impact, you always, 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 always consult with the colleague first. Always. But when in doubt, seek supervision. So always go to the colleague first when there is a consideration or a thing that you think is happening. And then when you think that it interferes and the colleague's not taking the appropriate actions, make sure that you do the appropriate thing. So if you go to the colleague and then they ignore you, make sure that you go to your employers, NASW, the licensing board, etc. But always, 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 and always consult with the person first. So when there's an incompetence, you should always consult with a colleague first, and then if they don't do it, go to the appropriate avenues. And then if there's unethical behavior, the social worker should take adequate measures to decrease or discourage inaccurate information or conduct of the person. So when this is, you should always make sure you go over the policies and procedures established by the governing boards to make sure that you know what appropriate things are, and then make sure you're always familiar with all of the avenues of way to do it. And then if you believe that they've acted unlawfully, you always want to again discuss the terms with the colleagues. And then if you believe that they haven't, do the appropriate action, meaning go to the NASW board, go to your employer, anything like that. So if you take anything out of this when it's consulting with colleagues, one, go to the colleague first. If that doesn't work, go to the clinical supervisor. And if that doesn't work, go to the licensing board. And if that doesn't work, go to the federal government. So the social worker's ethical responsibilities in practice settings. So supervision and consultation. So social workers who provide supervision or consultation should make sure that they have the necessary knowledge and competence. Just because you have a clinical license doesn't mean that you can be a clinical supervisor. We see that all the time. Someone gets their LCSW and they think like, all right, I'm going to provide supervision and charge people for it. Okay, what area of expertise are you doing this in? And they don't have any. And it's like, oh, so you're just trying to take people's money and exploit them in a spot that's otherwise necessary. And then whenever doing this, you always need to make sure you have clear, established boundaries. You don't want to walk in and be like, hey, pal, and it's not like a clinical or professional relationship. It's just you meeting with a friend, signing off on their hours, and then doodle-doodling around. And do not engage in any dual or relationships or exploit supervisees where it could actually be harm to self or others. You always want to make sure supervision or supervisees are the same thing with clients. Do not add them on social networking or social media. They're not your friends. They are other professionals that you are otherwise helping to go to the next level. And make sure that what they're doing is fair and respectful. You conduct yourself in a professional manner and you're signing off on what they do. So make sure that they are actually doing that as well. And then again, make sure that you're only providing instruction on areas of knowledge and competence on what you're doing. So don't be doing lectures on the Code of Ethics if you've never actually read the Code of Ethics or haven't gone through it. Or let's say the university needs somebody that is teaching gerontology practice, and you've never worked with the gerontology population. It's kind of hard for you to be ethical and present on information based on that. And then make sure that you evaluate in a fair and respectful manner. Just because you don't like somebody doesn't mean that you can give them a bad report. And then if you feel that things are going foggy, make sure you go through appropriate channels and then make sure you're educating and informing the people that are under you, because their behavior reflects on what you do. And again, don't engage in any dual or conflicts of interest or any potential risk of exploitation or potential harm to the student or, again, the social media component. Just because you are close to them does not mean that you should be close to them. And then when evaluating the performance of others, you should make sure that it's fair and considerate and it's objective rather than your subjective view and you just helping a homie out, being like, man, I'm totally going to give you a good report. I'm going to give you these hours, sign off on them, and make sure that you can get on your way and make sure that things are good. And then the social worker should take reasonable steps to ensure that documentation is accurate rather than just be like, write down a number and I'll sign off on these hours. Or let me make sure that the services that I'm providing are actually what are actually being provided. And when the documentation is being reviewed or present for people, we need to make sure that it's adequate and relevant to the services provided. I can't just be saying that I'm doing 2-hour sessions with clients for billing purposes just to make sure that I'm doing it. And then you should store the records for people and make sure that you have the required number of years based on your state. Michigan is 7 years. You have to keep a client's records for 7 years before discarding them. And then billing, make sure it's fair and reasonable and have a sliding fee scale if needed. And then when you're transferring a client, you need to minimize the possible confusion and harm to them. So let's say you're getting a new job, you didn't tell anybody and you just left the practice. You are being unethical based on not informing the clients, and you could actually be liable and a report be done to you. So when doing this, you want to make sure that you're coordinating services, making sure they're informed, and doing things that are ethically sound for them. And if a new client has been served by another agency, you need to discuss whether you can consult with them. You can't just say, hey, I know that agency. Let me talk to my friend that works there and get the lowdown on this client. Make sure that you follow the appropriate channels, get the client's consent, and roll on with that. And then make sure that you are advocating based on what the client's needs are. Just because it takes extra work for you to make sure that the client's needs are being addressed doesn't mean that you shouldn't. The client could benefit from a service. Your agency doesn't have that service. Go above and beyond and make sure that you're adequately doing what they need. And you need to make sure that the allocation of the services are fair. And when a client's needs are not adequately being addressed, make sure that you make sure it's a non-discriminatory and based on actual need. Just because somebody's been at the agency for a long time doesn't mean that they deserve services or resources more than somebody that could benefit otherwise. And then make sure that you're always getting adequate, appropriate staff supervision. Meaning, let's say you're meeting with your supervisor, you don't actually vibe, they're not telling you anything to help push and advance you. You're just meeting with them every week, and to get your hours, find somebody else. Yes, it's a pain in the tail. Yes, you may have to pay for it. Your agency might help pay for it. But don't make this something that isn't working for you or with you, because supervision is based to help you rather than hurt you. So if you feel like the supervision you're receiving is not appropriate, then seek it out. And then social work administrator should take the highest level to eliminate any violations. And if there are violations, then you need to make sure that they are being addressed. And then making sure that you're getting your continued education. Don't just go uninformed and know that you won't know everything and that you should. And you need to be committed to your agency. However, if a client's needs are over what the agency's needs are or the policies, you can go against them and say, hey, I'm here to defend my client and make sure their needs are met. And I'm not really sure that your agency is doing a great job with that. So we need to make sure that the employers are aware of our social work code of ethics and make sure that they're respecting that. If they're not, then we need to speak up against it. And even then, ASW could help you to make sure that your needs are adequately being addressed and assessed, and make sure that the policies are not interfering with your social worker ethics, values. And we need to always make sure that we're eliminating discrimination and unfair treatment within the work setting. And the social worker should do the due diligent stewards of resource allocation, meaning that we're making sure that we're not just blowing resources for the sake of it. We're not just handing out or stealing or anything like that, because within that, we don't need to get caught with unethical. And then labor management, making sure that we are doing the appropriate actions within that. again, making sure that we're competent with the employment that we take. We're not just walking into a job interview that we don't have the experience for and lying about it and then walking in and being like, oh yeah, I actually don't have this experience. I just wanted to get this job because I need the hours. I don't want to get licensed and you can help me do that. And then again, don't discriminate based on any practice implications or anything along those lines. And make sure that when you are conducting yourself, it's in a professional manner and that your personal life doesn't actually interfere with your ability to adequately address and assess the needs of your clients. You're not walking in and peddling drugs or like trafficking clients on the side type deal, and should not participate in any dishonest things. Be on the up and up. And like I said, even though we are in practice, we need to make sure that we do on our best behavior. And if there's anything that interferes with our ability, make sure that we are using our professional judgment to address and condone positive behavior. And make sure that we're making our own personal issues and addressing them immediately. Say you're having excessive anxiety, go to your supervisor and say like, hey, I need to make these adjustments to my workload, maybe even terminate my practice because I'm not able to actually handle all of the stress and things that's going on. I feel like I need a leave of absence from this. And social workers always need to speak on behalf of the agency, but if you're doing it, make sure that the information you're citing is actually accurate. So you'll have a lot of people that love to educate, love to share information, but some of the stuff that they're sharing isn't actually true, or it's like self-driving their own philosophy, and they're not actually helping people, they're actually exploiting and hurting people. And the social worker should always make sure that their professional qualifications, credentials, are things that are actually theirs. They can't lie and say, hey, I have a PhD, or I have my LCSW and you don't have your LCSW, or I have the LMSW or LCSW, depending on what your credentials are, or the master's level credential or clinical level. Make sure you actually have them. Don't misrepresent yourself or like try to buff it up. And then we should not solicit anything that is not otherwise warranted. So if somebody is in a vulnerable spot, you can't just be peddling or manipulating them based on what would be driving our own agenda. So just because I think something could be helpful for someone doesn't mean that I should offer it to them based on the position. So let's say I own a social work prep program. Just because I'm providing supervision to people and doing lectures at the university doesn't mean that I should be trying to sell things to people. Why? Because that's a vulnerable position that they're in. And I should be there to educate and condone and guide, but not ultimately just drive my own agenda. So don't let people solicit things to you, otherwise would not be helpful. And then when you're doing something, make sure that you're giving the appropriate credit to other people. So a lot of times you'll have someone that comes up with some really, really great stuff, and they say that it's theirs rather than actually just acknowledging being like, yeah, I actually borrowed this and took this. So a lot of people could actually lose their license by sharing copyrighted information about their prep. So a lot of people will share like practice questions trying to help people out. But if that company actually wanted to, they could come after you for copyright infringement and actually prevent you from getting licensed. So be aware of that, and know that social workers should protect and promote and enhance overall social work practice, and we need to be doing our due diligence about that, of advancing the profession. So that's kind of where I try my best to, even these study groups is my way to try to contribute my time and expertise and things to help promote the social work profession. So trying to give back, trying to inform, trying to educate, trying to give strategies to best do it, to allow for people to advance themselves. So other examples could be like research, doing testimonials, promoting and creating agencies and stuff like that. And always as social workers, we need to be contributing to the knowledge. So a lot of times people will get licensed and just forget about it. They won't share their knowledge. They won't share things at conferences or anything like that. So that's why anytime that I can get the chance to, I try to educate, try to go to conferences and present. I try to go to the university and present. I do the study group every Sunday just to make sure that people are out on the up and up and getting the best, most accurate information that could actually help them rather than me just trying to help myself and promote and drive an agenda. In an evaluation, social workers should monitor their policies and procedures that are happening at their agency. Just don't accept what is, look further into it, and make sure that you're using evidence-based practices at your agency rather than like an eclectic approach where you're just deviating away. And make sure whenever doing research that you always get the person's written consent from them. You don't want to exploit anybody. And you always want to be acting in the best way to ensure that the dignity, privacy, and everything of the research participants is had, and that the information is all professional and shared with them as well, so they get a copy of it. And again, any use of technology should be for the good of the research study rather than convenience, and for the good of what you think is appropriate. And always make sure that they have the right to withdraw so that they're aware of that. And when consent procedure is not understood by them, make sure that it's understandable and that we make sure that they're aware of what they're getting involved in rather than us just doing what we think is appropriate, and make sure that they have the positive supports. A lot of this information we've already gone over, and make sure that confidentiality is had, and make sure that we report the research findings accurately. So a lot of times people will conduct research and kind of like jade it away. So even test prep programs will say that they have like a 95% pass rate or like a 99.9%, which could be true, but a lot of times they might be lying because more people fail the exam than people like to admit. So, for example, the clinical exam, 16,000 people took it last year, 75% passed it. So 75% of 16,000 leaves us with like, let's say 12,000. So that means like 4,000 to 4,500 people did not pass it because that's a fourth. So a lot of people are using these prep programs. So don't be swooned or jaded based on what you hear. Always question what you find out and what you know. And always alert and avoid conflicts of interest, dual relationships, anything like that. And then to the broader society, the social worker always needs to keep the general welfare of everyone on the forefront to make sure that they're getting their needs adequately addressed, assessed, and met. And we always need to make sure that we're participating in social and political institutions, meaning voting, advocating, rallying, etc. And when there's a public emergency, we need to provide our insight. So maybe that's pro bono, maybe that's donating, maybe that's coordinating, just giving it any way that you possibly can to have it. You need to make sure that equal access to everything is available to people. So when you are going through like political agendas and social, make sure that what you're advocating for is for everyone. We need to make sure everyone has their basic needs and social justice met. So currently in this country, we're going through a lot of turmoil based on that, of some people not getting their needs adequately met and addressed. And a lot of social workers are standing up and promoting and supporting that. We need to make sure that the cultural knowledge and resources are being informed and shared adequately and appropriately. We need to make sure that equity inequality are had by everybody, meaning what you need is actually being done. We need to help to prevent and eliminate any domination or exploitation of people. So we need to make sure that we're standing up for people, what they need, what they want, what they should be getting, and no one should be exploited, discriminated on based on things that are outside of their control, such as race, culture, sexuality, sexual orientation, gender, age, etc. Stand up, and if you think something's a little wonky, you see something, say something, be something. Be the change that you would like to see. So that's the code of ethics. And as I stated, we are going to go over abuse, neglect, and terror soft as well. So abuse is the unintentional infliction of physical or emotional injury on a dependent child, anyone under the age of 18, anyone that has a cognitive disability, or is a part of the elder population. So as I stated before, 65 plus. And the neglect is the failure of a parent or caregiver to provide the basic needs of a dependent child. Again, anyone under the age of 18, anyone that has a cognitive disability, or anyone that is 65 plus. So, and then TerraSoft is a case where TerraSoft was dating an individual and they didn't want to be around them, which was Potter. So he started stalking her and had great distress from the loss, meaning they were dating. She's like, I don't want to see you anymore. He kind of flips out. And he started engaging in services at the University Medical Center. So all 8 of his sessions said he wanted to kill someone, which was TerraSoft. The therapist provided an ultimatum. If you keep saying that you're trying to kill someone, I'm going to have to hospitalize you. And if you can imagine, if you threaten a client like that, they're not going to show up. So he did not go back for services. So the therapist contacted the police, and Potter told the police he was not going to kill her. They released him. So the police went to his residence. Or do you want to kill somebody? He was like, no, I'm not going to kill anyone. They released him, and as a result, he murdered her. He went to her house, killed her, and in 1976, duty to warn was adopted, and anyone who does not comply could lose their license. Meaning, somebody says they're trying to kill someone, somebody's trying to harm someone, you have to warn them. But this is where it's subjective. So you could walk in, somebody could say, I really want to hurt somebody. And that is where you have to assess them and say, do you actually want to hurt somebody, or is this you just expressing yourself? What's the means? What's the intent? And how would you actually do it? Or is this just something? So when in doubt, for duty to warn, go to a supervisor and make sure you educate yourself on your state's licensing as well. So let's get back into the abuse. So physical abuse is any intentional and non-accidental injury to a dependent child, someone who has a disability, someone 65 and older. So examples of this could be like hitting them, striking them, burning them, biting them, using objects or forceful things to put them to the ground. And if you witness any of this or are told any of this from the person that's being abused, then you report it. But if you hear it from somebody else that thinks that the abuse is going on, then you need to talk to the person that's being abused first. So indicators of abuse that you'll often see in the question stems or practices: unexplained bruises on the person, presence of burns on the person that are unexplainable, multiple episodes of broken bones, unexplained head injuries or marks on the face, or the person will give you multiple explanations for an injury sustained or behavior otherwise. The next type of abuse is psychological or emotional abuse. And this is the intentional injury to the psychological capacity, meaning how someone feels, or emotional stability, meaning when this person's around, they get a little more erratic, or when they get reminders of the events, they get a little more wild. or substantial changes in behavior or emotional response. Say the person's really, really happy, someone else comes around and they just get angry and start shouting and having behaviors. That would be an indication of that. So an example of psychological abuse would be a caregiver tells their elderly parent that they're useless and they should just die already. Very, very hurtful to the person to hear that, and definitely they're in a vulnerable position. In more of the child realm, a parent tells their child that they're stupid and that they're always going to be a failure since they did not pass an exam they had. Very harsh and definitely hurtful to the person, and it will be marked on that person for the entirety of their life. So indicators of psychological or emotional abuse, like a person may have increased anxiety or hypervigilance in relationships or social interaction. They may be like super duper structured, not know what to do when the situation is outside of their control. The person may find it difficult to establish relationships and actually trust people outside and beyond themselves. They may find it difficult to have social supports or engage with social support. So I'm super duper struggling with this ASWB exam. I don't know what to do, but I am not willing to reach out to people, not willing to accept assistance from people because I feel like he can handle it, and I don't want to quote unquote feel like I have to owe somebody anything. The person may have unexplained delays in cognition or comprehension. They may have increased irritability and frequent fights with others when they feel they are being challenged. So you may be just having a calm discussion with somebody, and then you say like, "Hey, I think something that you just said is inaccurate." So let's say somebody like types in and says, "Phil, that's not psychological abuse. You're a fool. How could you ever say those things?" And then I just pop off and snap and say, "How could you? I'm the expert. I'm doing this. I'm the one that has a study group." And everyone here would be like, "Holy smokes, who is this guy?" But that might be a trigger that somebody might have. And then within that, the third type is sexual abuse. So that's when an adult or caregiver engages in inappropriate sexual involvement with a child, individual with a cognitive disability, or someone of the elder population, such as 65 and older. So anyone can be perceived as vulnerable. So again, anywhere from the ages of 18 to 65, it's considered like sexual assault rather than sexual abuse, and it's up to the person whether they want to report it or not. And the regulatory ways of doing that would be through the legality system rather than Child Protective or APS. And then examples of this are like sexual talk, sexting, sending and receiving nude photographs, physical contact with a person, touching, that could be oral sex or penetrable intercourse. However, it can involve having the vulnerable person watch sexual content with their willingness or knowledge to do so. So you could have pornographic tapes going in the background while babysitting somebody, and it could be considered sexual abuse. Why? Because that's not age appropriate. So indicators of sexual abuse, you could have developmental regressions, such as someone starts bedwetting or like defecating on themselves. They could start clinging back to their caregivers when they otherwise were independent, or they care about support in a developmentally inappropriate manner. Meaning, I started sleeping in my parents' bed again after I had been sleeping in my own bed. And then parents might be like, "What the heck's the deal?" Or they might start developing separation anxiety from their parents or increased agitation. Person has increased fear or anxiety in particular situations or around particular people who have abused them, or around people that have witnessed the abuse and done nothing. So let's say we have a child that every time they go to their uncle's house, they get a little more angry, a little more anxious. They start having tantrums and disrespecting everybody. And that might be because uncle's sexually abusing them and parents aren't really picking up on these signs. Or let's say we have an older person that always has their appointments, their son picks them up. But people notice like, wow, mom really changes, or this person gets very, very angry when that person's going to pick them up or volunteers to pick them up. What's behind this? That may be because that person's sexually abusing them on the way to the outing. Person may have sleep disturbances or nightmares, night terrors, shouting, excessive things that they may not otherwise know. The person may sexually act out or perform sexual acts on toys. See a lot of kids like playing and then doing sexual gestures with the toys, and then be like, wow, this is kind of super duper weird. Or young children abusing other children and not knowing it because they feel like that is appropriate behavior and they don't know otherwise. Like bruising or scarring on genital or private areas is a huge indicator as well. And sexually transmitted diseases or infections or medical conditions associated with sexual behavior, and you'd be like, wow, how does this person actually have all of this? And then financial abuse, which is more or less around the elder population, is when someone is being exploited for money and they're not being given the financial means or resources to get their needs met that they're entitled to. And those indications would be like not getting adequate food, like malnourished, etc. So key considerations when answering abuse questions. The way you react on it, as I was saying before, is dependent on who told you the information and how you received it. So, for example, if a teacher, parent, friend, neighbor, pastor, colleague, anyone other than the person being abused or doing the abusing tells you, you always speak to the person who was abused first, or you visit them in person to gather your own insight on the potential of abuse and neglect. Why? Because we don't need hearsay and we want to have some actual backing behind what we're saying. We don't investigate, we just inquire and gather information to help guide us a little bit further. However, always keep in mind the age of the person, their mental capacity, and if the person's too young or unable to communicate, you would visually investigate or just file the CPS report or APS report immediately. And after you get this information, then you report to APS or CPS. And then when the person who is being abused or the perpetrator of the abuse tells you the information directly, you always go to the appropriate authorities first. You heard it from the horse's mouth. You need to make sure that you do the appropriate action for this. And then key considerations when to seek out supervision. And this list is, again, not every possible situation, but just particular guidelines to be ethical when to do so. So 1, when the person does not have the appropriate education or feels he or she is uncomfortable in the situation, again, only practice in areas of competency. And if you don't have any information, always refer out. If you have a little bit of information, seek out supervision. 2, whenever the social worker has a reaction of or previous experience similar to the client's that could get in the way of them treating the client, countertransference. So whenever there's a potential, even if the person feels like they can handle it, they should seek out supervision. So whenever someone feels that they are missing something, or if the supervisor can provide insight and assistance in a client situation. And then 4, when in doubt, seek guidance. Why? Because you don't want to just proceed based on your own backing, because 2 heads better than 1, as long as it's an educated head. When should you not seek supervision? Whenever the social worker has the needed information and expertise to treat the clients and they're appropriate and adequate to do so. Don't be overzealous and think that you can handle everything. 2, whenever the client brings in something to the therapeutic relationship that can prevent the progress. For example, they have sexual attraction to a therapist or they're acting inappropriately. This would require the social worker to refer out instead. And when your supervisor is very competent and has the credentials and everything to assist you, it's a good supervisor. If they do not have the appropriate expertise, credentials, and experience, they're being unethical. But like I said, When in doubt and you see something, say something. Any questions on anything that I went over before we get into the practice? Questions. And if you have a question, just type yes into the chat, but if you do not, type no into the chat, so that way we know where we're at. Yes, okay. So hang on, Mindy, and then we'll get into it. So 2 questions. Okay. And if you have a question, get ready to type your question up so that way we have it readily available. All right, so if you had a question, type it out now. So that way I can address it. 65 plus even with competent adults? Is that even with competent adults? Yes. Because they're considered a vulnerable population, you would still need to advocate on behalf of them. They can say what they would want to do in their own situation. You'd still broach it and view it. Because if there's a potential for exploitation, that person may be coerced and not able to actually vocalize and adequately know what their needs are. Because even if the person, as we were saying before, if there's potential to harm self or others, it supersedes it, meaning we need to make sure people are safe, getting their needs met, and again, abuse or neglect, self-harm or others. So regardless of that, that is where we'd need to make sure. So vulnerable populations are protected. Any other questions? Okay. Resume the recording. And those that have never done questions before, I read the question, read the answers, and then ask you to type in a keyword. And then when we have a decent amount of people that have typed in the keyword into the chat, I open the polls. I have it open for a minute, minute and a half, and then move on to the next question. But if you need more time, type time into the chat. So, question 1. A recently hired social worker at a community mental health agency sees a client from their group get out of a colleague's car. The social worker feels uncomfortable with the colleague's actions. What should the social worker do first? A, report the colleague's behavior to the clinical supervisor. B, talk to the colleague about the situation. C, report the colleague to the social work licensing board. D, ignore the action since this is appropriate behavior. When you have your answer, type the word powerful into the chat. Okay. I'm going to launch the poll. And those that have never done a poll before, if the poll didn't just pop up onto your screen, you may have to go into the bottom bar in the Zoom chat and it'll open up from there. Okay. And I will give 30 more seconds. Okay, let's see. So recently hired social worker at a community health agency. Sees a client from Goop get into a Coal Lake scar, and the social worker feels uncomfortable with the action. What should the social worker do first? Ignore it? No. Bad moves. Why? See something, say something, be something. Report the colleague to the social work licensing board. Bad move. That's pretty quick. Hey, I don't agree with you. All right, you're getting reported. And then do we talk to the colleague or go to the clinical supervisor? And again, whenever we have a conflict with a colleague, we always talk to them first to get their view of this person. And a key thing here is they're recently hired. So let's say this is a procedure that's been going on for a long time. You go into a clinical supervisor is pretty overzealous and can actually create a bad dynamic within your agency. So that's how you'd answer that. Question 2. A social worker is working with a 26-year-old female that was recently involved in a domestic violence situation with her boyfriend. Klein discussed how the incident resulted in her being hospitalized. The social worker was previously in an abusive relationship, but does not feel like her previous experience will get in the way of treating the client. What is the best action for the social worker to take in this situation? A. Disclose the social worker's own experience to help the client feel less alone in her situation. B. Inform the client that the social worker is going to refer her to a different therapist that can better treat her. C. Continue treating the client and seek supervision to help address any countertransference that arises. D. Continue treating the client and consult with coworkers with any struggles she experiences. When you have your answer, type blessed into the chat. All right, and I will open the polls now. Twenty more seconds. Polls are closing. The majority think it's C, some think it's B, some think it's A. So a social worker is making a meeting with a 26-year-old client, and I do that almost every time. Now that it's black. All right. Recently involved in a domestic violence situation. The incident resulted in being hospitalized, and the social worker was previously in an abusive relationship. However, does not feel like it would impact services. Disclose the social worker's own experience. No bad moves. We don't. Again, we don't ever really disclose our own information unless it is going to promote clinical progression. But in this situation, not a good move. Referring her out is going to be a bad move because she just told you a traumatic event in her life, and you shipping her away is not an appropriate behavior. Because remember, we only refer when the client is bringing something in that could prevent clinical progress, but this is the social worker's own experience and reactions, and she doesn't feel like it's going to assist. And then we wouldn't choose to consult with our coworkers because, again, whenever it's available and appropriate, we would seek supervision because it's more profound and powerful because that means that person is an expert in that field. That is what we would do. The key thing here, in case it arises, because as of right now, there's no like countertransference. So that is how you'd answer that question. A social worker in an outpatient clinic just terminated services with a 26-year-old client who she had been working with for 1 year. The client and therapist worked on positive ways for the client to establish positive relationships in his life. The social worker received a friend request on Facebook from the client. What is the most appropriate action for the social worker to take? A, accept the friend request because it shows therapeutic progress on the client's end. B, accept the friend request to allow for the social worker to stay connected with the client. C, decline the friend request since it is unethical for the social worker to have relationships with clients. D, decline the friend request since it would be unethical for the social worker to stay connected with the client. When you have your answer, type one thing that you're looking forward to in the next week into the chat. So day off, pass the exam, warmer weather, a day off, Friday, warm weather. Studying, passing the exam, warm weather, pass my exam, sunshine, studying, passing, studying, passing the exam, warmer weather. I feel like everyone's on the same stroke. You're either excited about warmer weather, passing your exam, and that's it. And then some peace. Reducing anxiety. Something I am looking forward to. Potentially hearing back from my job interview, defeating the exam, all of the above, and my sister coming home from North Carolina. Yay! Into cold old Michigan? Woof. What a bold strategy. Man, that's wild. For spring break. Oh, okay. I was going to say, wow, that is a bold move. Let's go from a nice North Carolina to cold old Michigan. Tis. But yeah, I'm excited to potentially hear back from a job interview that I had. That will be exciting. Oh, happy days. Putting that LMSW in my signature. Rainy North Carolina. That will be great, Phil. Good luck passing, Phil. That would be great. Good luck. Thank you. I think about it every day, honestly, since it happened. And I was just talking to my parents about it, and they always keep me grounded and say, what is going to be is going to be. But can't help to be a human sometimes. 30 more seconds on the question, by the way. But I need to take my own advice that I share with you guys. Let things be, because you're not going to always get things correct. You're not always going to do the quote-unquote best action. But as long as you are progressing in the right direction and growing, things will work out. Always. And things that you think will be good or you want might not always be. But closing the polls, the majority think it's C, some think it's D. So social worker in an outpatient clinic recently terminated services with a 26-year-old client. She had been working with the client for 1 year. Client therapist worked on positive strategies for the client. Social worker received a Facebook request, and this is definitely a reasoning question. Definitely wouldn't accept. And if you guys I'm glad you guys didn't choose that. So I must have hammered this home. Don't ever accept it. It's a bad move. Be ethical, be ethical, be ethical. So then we notice that decline the request is in both of these. But do we want to decline it because it's unethical for the social worker to have a relationship with the client? Or that we can't stay connected to the client? So the big thing that we have to keep in mind and that I would challenge is those that chose D. Let's say a client calls you up and wants to let you know how they're doing. We wouldn't just slam the phone on their ear. So we can stay connected to clients and see how they're clinically doing, but we're not able to maintain full-on relationships with them. I wouldn't invite them out. I wouldn't meet them up. I wouldn't do all of these things. I would make sure that their needs are adequately being addressed and clinically what is appropriate. Other than that, we're not having a relationship. So that's the appropriate answer there. The majority thought that was the answer. So I must have hammered that home pretty strong within the ethics. So that's good. Fourth one, a social worker at an outpatient clinic has been working with a 45-year-old female for 8 months. The woman engaged in services after a breakup she had with her boyfriend of 4 years. The woman has been working on ways to engage in healthy relationships and to set boundaries with others. The social worker and woman agree it is time for the services to terminate. On their last appointment, the woman gives the social worker a coin that her grandfather gave her and told her to give it to someone she admires. What would be the best way for the social worker to respond? A, accept the gift as it would be more detrimental to decline the gift. B, thank the client for her generosity and inform her why it would be unethical to accept the gift. C, thank the client for her generosity and gather information on the meaning of the gift. Or D, decline the gift. When you have your answer, type one thing that you are thankful for in the chat. So we have health, my study groups, amazing family, the study group, family, tutoring, supportive friends, family, family. Oh, and Phil. Oh, my babies, family, life, family. Phil, family, and Phil. Mine is going to be my intelligence and hardships. Family, God, and Phil. Family, 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 and friends. So yeah, mine is definitely my intelligence and hardships. My family and the support through my father's breast. Oh wow, support through my mother's breast cancer diagnosis. Also the study group. Wow, talk about a why right there. Honestly, I'm so sorry to hear that. Honestly, like that is crazy. Hmm. Hmm. Study group and support from them. Like honestly, I feel deeply for that. Because those that she's doing good, second round of chemo is starting to work. Awesome, awesome. That's so awesome. Yeah, my mom is currently going through I think it's called immune therapy. Yeah, I think it's immune therapy because she was diagnosed with cancer as well. So I feel for you. I deeply, deeply feel for you. And cancer's not good. But whenever we see progression, it's always amazing to hear. So yes. I'll be thinking about you and your family, and I will include you guys into my prayers. Like, mm, 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 mm. Special special spot in my heart for situations like that. And I'll give 30 more seconds, but all right. Let's get into it. So, a social worker at an outpatient clinic has been working with a 45-year-old female, 8 months. The woman engaged in the service after a breakup with a boyfriend of 4 years, working with healthy relationships and setting boundaries. The social worker and woman agree it's time for services to end. The woman gives the social worker a coin that was special to her. What should the social worker do? So this is definitely reasoning. So we would not just outright accept the gift because that could be bad moves and create a conflict of interest or do a relationship, and that's not something we want to do. That is just not appropriate. And we wouldn't just outright decline the gift. So, as per the second question, or the last question, both of these say thanks for the generosity. Would we just inform her why it would be unethical? Or do we want to gather information on the meaning of this? And if we want to be semantical, which I often am, do we want to educate or do we want to assess first? And those that have been rocking with me for a minute know that we would assess over educate. So that is the correct answer. Any questions on that? What is answer 3? So answer 3 was decline the friend request because it was unethical for the social worker to have relationships. Okay, so question 5. Social worker at a community mental health clinic is working with a 16-year-old female who reports struggling with symptoms of depression. The girl reports that she recently had a fight with one of her friends over a boy that she likes. The social worker remembers her son telling her about 2 girls fighting over him. Upon further discussion, the social worker's son is the boy of interest. However, the social worker believes she can still effectively work with the client. What would be the best thing for the social worker to do in this situation? A, continue to work with the client since she believes there's no issue. Discuss the information to allow for her to have self-determination in her own treatment. C, refer the client to another agency, another therapist at the agency. D, continue to see the client and seek supervision around any issues. So when you have your answer, he's going too quick. Sorry, Phil. Oh, am I going too quick? What was the previous answer? Thank the client for the generosity and gather information on the gift. Okay. When you have your answer, type one thing that you would like to work on in your life. Organizing, procrastinating, anxiety. Oh, small, just drop it. Anxiety, organizing for sure. Anxiety, LCS, helping others, staying organized. Fear, prioritizing. Goals I put on hold until I pass. Patience, focus, more patient, stay positive. Anxiety. Seems like we have a lot of anxiety, a lot of patience, and a lot of organization. Time management, anxiety, yes, of course. Stay staying positive, more patient, work on speed. The mine would be time management and self-worth. Learning to answer the questions, recognizing my strengths. Preach, preach, preach. That one is deep rooted within all. Staying focused. Saying no to people. There we go. Find motivation. So my challenge for you, you're lacking motivation, is to remember where and why you started. Because that will lie everything that you need to know about yourself. One of my motivations is to make sure that future generations never have to go through anything that I went through. So I will continue to push and strive to make sure that opportunities are available. Helping population with schizophrenia and depression. Whoa. And I'll give 30 more seconds. More time at the gym. Health is wealth. 5 seconds. Okay. So the majority think it's C, some think it's D, some think it's A, some think it's B. So let's look at it. Social worker at a community mental health clinic, working with a 16-year-old female, struggles with symptoms of depression. The girl reports she recently got in a fight with her friends over a boy that she likes. The social worker remembers her son telling her about 2 girls fighting over him. Social worker's son is the boy of interest. However, social worker believes she can still effectively work with him. What is the most appropriate? Again, reasoning. Why? Most ethical considerations are reasoning. So continue to work with the client because she believes there's no issue. It's not the best answer because remember, it doesn't matter what we think, what we feel, it's what is actually practical and possible. B would be incorrect here because yes, we want to give clients self-determination. This decision is beyond what the client is able to do. Meaning, let's say we say, hey, I noticed that my son, you were fighting over my son actually. This client may take it as the opportunity that if they continue to see you, that your son would want to engage in a relationship with them and they can get more of an in. So do we refer out or do we just seek supervision? So remember, this is something beyond what the social worker is actually able to manage because it's something that the client is bringing in. Let's say we continue seeing this client and your son does get into a relationship with this woman. Then it would put you into a weird situation where you're basically providing therapy to somebody that is a part of the family now. So the best thing to do is to avoid and mitigate a dual relationship or a conflict of interest. So that is why you would want to refer out. Any questions on that one? Okay. So the next question. So without without explaining the reasons. So that goes without like saying, because if you're going to refer somebody, you have to educate them on the transition. This is just saying that that would be the most appropriate action. That was tricky. I do have some tricks up my sleeve here and there. Occasionally, I should say. Oops, this is not all the same. So let me zoom this down. Question 6. A hospital social worker is working with a family and their 12-year-old daughter, who are originally from Kenya. The family reports that their daughter has been isolating, having difficulty sleeping in periods of low mood. The social worker asks the daughter what has been going on in her situation and finds out that her parents plan to change her body based on tradition. Upon further discovery, the family plans to mutilate her genitals to prepare her for womanhood. What should the social worker do next? Contact Child Protective Services, provide information to the family on the dangers of female genital mutilation, respect the family's cultural traditions and differences. D, connect the family with medical services to assist in the procedure. And when you have your answer, type 1 positive affirmation you would tell yourself. I get this. Have faith. I can. I got this. I'm valued. I can do hard things. I got this. You can do this. I got this. I got this. I am smart. You can do it yourself. I can do it. I am smart and strong. Do your best and let God do the rest. I will pass my exam. I can do this. I will pass this board exam. Stay positive. It's already done. I'm coming out of SW in 2 weeks. Trust yourself. $30 more seconds. Okay, so the majority think it's A, some think it's B, some think it's D. So a hospital social worker is working with family and their 12-year-old daughter, who are originally from Kenya. The family reports that their daughter has been isolating, having difficulty sleeping in periods of low mood. The social worker asks the daughter what is going on in her situation and finds out parents want to change her body based on tradition. And the family plans to mutilate the woman's genitals. And application question. So contacting CPS would be safety, provide information, educate, respect the traditions, intervene, and connect the family with medical services would be intervene as well. So immediately remove C and D because this was the question I was talking about earlier. So if we deleted that they were from Kenya, this question would read that a hospital social worker is with a family. Family reports that the daughter is depressed. They plan to mutilate her genitals. What should they do? So we wouldn't just provide information because one, it's illegal to do female genitalia mutilation in the United States. So we contact CPS so that way they can directly get involved, and they may not do anything harsh. They may just simply just provide education and guide the process with that. Why not consider the culture? This person's at risk for potentially getting harm done to them. If we neglect this and let the client go home, then we would be liable for the danger and detriment of this client. So let's say this client goes home, gets her genitals mutilated, and she dies. This would be our consideration and our responsibility to do that. So that's why I always say if culture is not contributing to the question, it's taken away from that. And it sounds like she's already affected by the idea. The depression, yeah. All right, question 7. A home-based social worker is completing a routine appointment with their 60-year-old female client that they've seen for 5 months. The client recently let her daughter, who struggles with addiction, and her 2-year-old son move in with her, which has caused an increase in her anxiety. The social worker sees marks on the 2-year-old son or child that appears to be burn marks. The client reports that she needs help with renewing her Medicaid. What would be the best thing for the social worker to do in this situation? A, file a child protective service report. Ignore the burn marks but continue to monitor for any signs of abuse in the future. C, confront the client about the burn marks. D, provide information on the signs of abuse and gauge the client's reaction. When you have your answer, type one positive thing about someone else in the chat. He's just trying to better our community and criminal lessons. Supportive, resilient, kind to one another, supportive, patient, determined, supportive, great support system, dedicated to their study. You all got this. Eager, kind, supportive. Comfortable with asking questions, committed, all will pass, energetic, resilient, encouraging, social work, thinking, determined. Understanding. And I'll give another minute. All right, 10 seconds. All right, so the majority think it's A, some think it's B, some think it is C. So we have a home-based social worker completing a routine visit with her 60-year-old client. They've seen for 5 months. They recently let the daughter who struggles with addiction, 2-year-old son, move in. It's increased the anxiety. The social worker sees marks on the 2-year-old child that appear to be burn marks. The client reports that she needs help with the Medicaid. What would be the best thing for the social worker to do? D, provide information on the signs of abuse would be inappropriate. Why? Because we don't really confront the clients, and we wouldn't be like, here's this information on this. Pow! You've been abusing this child. How dare you? Type deal. So we wouldn't just backdoor our way in. So we wouldn't confront the client about the burn marks either. So then would we file a CPS report or ignore the burn marks? So here, the key thing, it only appears to be burn marks. So since this is our first encounter with this and not something that we've seen before, we don't want to jump to conclusions. So we ignore the burn marks and continue to monitor. Because if this is a routine visit, we would definitely be back around, and burn marks can mirror common scrapes, etc. So we don't want to jump to conclusions and assume anything. And if we see it over time, we can then file a CPS report, because then we would have some backing and evidence based on that. Any questions on any of that, since the majority thought it was CPS reporting? It's confusing. Yes. Tricky, tricky, tricky. Yeah, a little confusing. Why wouldn't we confront and ask? So confronting them, unless, like, you don't ever really want to confront a client like severely, because then it could create resistance, and then your relationship with the client could automatically end. I thought and visually marks report. So it only appears to be burn marks, because this could be common scrape. And again, this is all based on your state. So in Michigan, we would assess and then go back. I feel like it's better to stay safe and sorry, better report CPS, but it'd be a good point. Here's would be the key. Yes, because let's say it's just a common scrape mark that they got from falling on the ground. And we're like, all right, CPS, go and look at this this scrape. And then it's like, oh, why did you make a CPS report? Type deal, which then could lead your CPS reports in the future not get investigated. You know, so it's not that you're neglecting it, because maybe you make a more frequent visit than you normally would just to make sure. That was me too, but they're very much the type that throw you off. So yeah, based on the question, make sure you understand and examine each line and make sure things aren't adding or contributing. So that's the difficulties with questions, is it doesn't fill in all of the details, but appears is hearsay. Evidence is concrete. Any other questions about anything that we've gone over today? The word ignore threw me off. Why? What if it is a one-time visit report? So the key thing here is it's a routine visit. And normally with social work visits, it's more than just a one-time go around. But if it was an off chance that it was a one-time visit, I would document it, and then you could subsequently report it. But since it's a routine guy, that's how I would react. Got it, but tricky. You're welcome. You guys are welcome. I thought that's it. Okay, thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions before I stop the recording? And if you don't, just type no one in the chat. So what's in that? Okay. Okay. So let me